I'm a really big advocate of this idea that you get to create your own purpose and your own meaning. I know a lot of people might not agree with that, and they definitely don't have to. One of the challenging things about a lot of burnout experience is that it's usually part of a learned pattern that someone's been running for years. This is where we're going to lean into a bit of nihilism. I'm a big believer of everything is connected. I'm a big believer of nothing matters. I think they're actually the same thing.
Hello and welcome to Coach Curious. I'm your host, Ben, and on this show, we offer you a seat at the table with some of Australia's leading coaches. So I'm really happy to introduce our first guest on the show ever, Susy Natal. And she frames her work as strategic coaching for a balanced mind and life. Susy holds a Bachelor of Psychology with first-class honours from the University of Sydney, a Diploma of Strategic Coaching. She's also an NLP Master Practitioner and also holds a Certificate 3 and 4 in fitness, as well as Wellness Coaching Level 1. So it's an incredibly impressive rap sheet, and we're super excited to have you here. So welcome, Susy.
Hello. Thank you so much for asking me to be here today.
Thank you for being here. So I'm just going to jump straight into it and ask about a concept that you talk about quite regularly, which is the epidemics of our time. So this is things like device addiction, overstimulation, burnout, loneliness, lots of big concepts that we face on a day-to-day basis. And I think what we're seeing today is possibly the impacts of some of these things more than we've seen in the past. And so I just want to sort of open it up to you and see, what are these concepts and why are they affecting people so much now?
Wow. Okay. We're going straight into the deep end. I like it. And it's an area that I really find quite fascinating because more and more it's appearing in the space of coaching, which feels almost kind of counterintuitive because people usually expect to go to a coach because they want to achieve more. But this elegance of less is more is getting lost more and more in this world because everything is getting commodified, everything is getting accelerated. There's so much availability and somewhat to a detriment, right? Because life isn't just meant to be convenient, it's meant to be so many other things. So much of the coaching that I aim to do is, in a way, to take things right back and remind ourselves that we're mammals and we're living in such an artificially created environment for us. And our poor little brains are kind of freaking out as a consequence. Obviously, there's the elephant in the room in that COVID times were really quite intense in so many ways beyond the obvious. Things changed so much. There was a lot of divide, but there was this really interesting epidemic that was already creeping up for a few years. And I'd already been watching it well before COVID struck, which is burnout, which interestingly enough, a lot of people can't really agree on what it is. Some people decide that it doesn't exist. Anyone who feels like they've experienced it disagrees with that completely. It's this really interesting rise that is coming up. And you mentioned several epidemics. And one of the things that's been interesting me so much lately is on whether they're actually separate epidemics or in a way they might all be the same thing. Because when you start to follow the rabbit hole down, there are common trends of how these things tie into each other. For example, these are now encouraged to be our best friends, but they are accelerating everything. It means there's a notification for everything. People feel that they can be so hyper connected with everything. But suddenly we've got terms like fubbing and ambiguous loss and all of these other new created things that are technically connecting us more, but actually pushing us further apart from each other. There's all of these interesting narratives going around out there where everybody feels a sense of desire for the community. Everyone feels like they're a burden if they dare to mention that they're struggling. So they don't want to speak up. They're feeling overwhelmed. They've got 25 notifications. They want to go for the promotion, the cost of living, etc., etc. All of these things are interconnected, even though they're not necessarily directly related when you start looking at it just on the surface level. more and more, I feel that the coaching experience is becoming about looking at how these things are actually woven together and where our need to reconnect with our humanity is actually quite typically at the foundation of many of these issues.
Mm. And so for something like device addiction and even to an extent, AI that is constantly coming up more and more now as well. These are
Oh, yeah.
technologies that we become more and more dependent on the more they sort of proliferate through society. They solve so many problems for us, but what sort of impact does that have on our own cognition and the way that we interpret the world or the way that we interact with the world?
Wow, that's a big question. And there are a few broad strokes that can be kind of brought out. For example, um, the algorithm is part of the hook.
Mm,
The likes and the attention are the other part of the hook. So the algorithm, together with the attention, is what can create that compulsive pursuit via social media. There is this general understanding that, I hate to say it, but short form media is kind of making us less clever, in that it is really restricting our capacity to continue practicing so many parts of the human condition that we already struggle with anyway. It's not news that humans struggle with short-term versus long-term gratification. I think that if humans didn't, on some level, innately struggle with that, I don't think coaches would have ever existed in the first place. But the tricky thing is that things are becoming so instantaneous and so available that the divide between those things and our tolerance for practicing turning away those instantaneous, often quite dopaminergic stimuli is becoming harder and harder to do because we feel more and more de-incentivized to try to do it. And there are so many other ramifications to this because stuff that feels good right now typically doesn't feel so great later. And because there's this thing called hedonic adaptation, we can land ourselves in a tremendous amount of trouble. AI is really interesting and there is a lot of overlap, but the way in which we interact with AI and the way in which we interact with social media is actually quite different. I find that AI has the capacity, and look, social media has the capacity to be really positive as well. But the issue is the algorithm and the monetization. Those two things have somewhat created a bit of a monster within social media. And it's sort of left to the individual to kind of navigate that minefield and hopefully they won't get addicted. AI is really interesting because it feels intelligent, but it's not.
mm,
It is essentially as intelligent as the amalgamation of the whole. And so it is incredibly powerful. It can help us do things that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do in terms of speed, in terms of efficiency. But again, not everything is speed and efficiency. Something that I was reading that was really interesting the other day was this random article about people turning to ChatGPT for relationship advice.
mm,
And that's actually a really dangerous area to turn to for in particular ChatGPT. Obviously it's hard to speak for every single AI platform because goodness knows how many even exist now, but there are so many AI platforms that are designed to essentially be this perfect echo chamber. And so, from the perspective of providing additional momentum forward for an individual, they're fantastic. They are your most powerful personal assistant ever, but they don't have a nervous system
mm,
and they don't have opinions of their own and they don't have that capacity to sit back and go, yeah, but have you thought about what your role might be in this?
mm,
And AI, it's intelligent until it's not. Kind of like how we're intelligent until we're not. I feel that these things, social media and AI, they're not inherently good or bad. I think a lot of it is the challenge that many folks who build these platforms like money more than they like people.
Mm,
That's obviously just my opinion. But I have a feeling that possibly a few people might share in that. They're just a tool.
mm,
They're just a tool, but they're very, very powerful tools. And because they're kind of getting this enormous amount of momentum behind them before we can create wisdom and education and an understanding of how to manage ourselves around them. And they're powered by a lot of money and a lot of vested interest in more money. It's a tricky space. It's not inherently good or bad, but it is a tricky space. I definitely utilize AI. I
mm,
love it. I think it's fantastic. However, I do also try to kind of keep a finger on the pulse of, am I overutilizing it? Because we also do always retain this responsibility to ourselves. Even where AI can be completely innocent, any skill that you're not practicing, you start to lose. Are you interested in losing the skill that you're handing over to AI? There might be some where you're like, yeah, sure, don't care, please make it go away. But there might be others where people are doing an enormous disservice to themselves by starting to lose touch with the skills that they have otherwise been working really hard to build up. And this is one of the other reasons why when AI is overutilized in interpersonal situations, it can really trip us up, in part because we don't take ownership over what we're saying because it's not ours.
absolutely. I think it's a really interesting point you made around are you willing to lose that skill? And I think that's a potentially slippery slope with the proliferation of AI as it does more and more roles in our day-to-day life, giving us relationship advice or people using it as a search engine for medical advice or something like that, or writing or creating or all of those types of skills. And I think that, yeah, potentially it's a slippery slope of people not realizing they're giving up that skill. They're just sort of slowly over time handing it over to, as you say, to a new tool, but not realizing that's sort of degrading within themselves. So it's certainly something that's going to change more and more over time. Could you tell us a little bit more around burnout? You were saying before that there isn't a clear definition of what burnout is, but I think to some degree, everyone's experienced it. Anyone that's had, has all the duties in life, whether it's parenting or work or even school studies to some degree as well. What impact does that have on us from a physical and a mental perspective?
You said the key word there, experience. Burnout is an experience. And that's why I think I said so much of my little rigmarole before, because some people arrive at burnout because they just did too many things, or at
Mm,
least that's their experience of how it happened. Some people arrive at burnout because they were working in a toxic environment where it might not have been too much about overwork, but rather somebody who was bullying them and the others who were not supporting them and turned a blind eye. Some people might arrive at burnout emotionally, others arrive at burnout mentally. And what's really interesting is that humans can't be separated from their context, which is actually one of the foundational pieces of how I like to approach my coaching. You can't separate a human from their context. And through my experience of observing burnout in many people and experiencing it to a fair degree as well, it feels like burnout is a contextual experience, and we all kind of, not necessarily, most of us know when we're going through it, and a lot of us can recognize it in other people when they're going through it. But not everyone arrives at it in the same way. In terms of the impacts of this, whew, how long is a piece of string? Um, I think one of the most challenging things about something like burnout is, again, because it's an experience, nobody can really agree. Is that person experiencing burnout? Yes or no? What do we do with that? Pizzas on a Friday or a quick 3-day trip to Bali is not actually going to resolve it a lot of the time. It can help. It can really help, but it's not going to resolve it. And one of the challenging things about a lot of burnout experience is that it's usually part of a learned pattern that someone's been running for years. And then there's this expectation that in 2 weeks, bingo, bango, not only will you undo several decades worth of a conditioned response, but you will also recover from that in a couple of weeks. The idea that a quick holiday can resolve this is very dangerous, in particular because burnout is a really big case of a watched pot never boils. Because so much of it, I believe, has to do with a reconnection to the self in terms of this returning to yourself. And if you're sitting there giving yourself a hard time going, come on, hurry up, you should be feeling better by now, as if that's going to help. And that loop there is actually what keeps so many people trapped in a burnout cycle, because they go, oh, but I'm doing all the right things. I'm eating well. I'm trying to make sure I sleep as much as I can. Why am I not getting better? When is this going to improve? And it can come across as a really facetious answer, but it's like, well, when you stop asking that question is when the process will actually begin, because burnout is resolved through a surrendering to yourself, almost like this letting go and accepting that we are humans first and these little corporate things second.
Right.
And look, it's not always to do with the corporate world. The reason why I utilize that word is because we all kind of understand what that means. But humans are getting forced to behave in commodified ways so much. Personally, I believe this is actually another response to the world being so digital and so filled with notifications. We're accustomed to things being so convenient, so streamlined, back to back. And machines can work that way. One of the things that I often remind my clients and myself, I'm not arriving at this from a place of nirvana or healing. It's like this is a lived experience as well. Oh my goodness, blanked there for a second. Wake up, rewind. Um, you don't get to treat yourself like a machine. One of the reasons why someone can get angry at their laptop is because, well, it's supposed to behave more or less the same all the time. If it's on, it should be working. It might blue screen of death you, but then off and on and away you go. We've developed, I believe, through so much exposure to technology and through things that are more or less behaving the same way all the time, it feels like we're starting to develop an expectation that mirrors that of ourselves. That's not how humans work. That's not how humans have ever worked. And there's actually nothing we can do to make ourselves work that way. And very often, part of what I see in the coaching process is people self-flagellating because there's this expectation of like, when will I be able to do that? And the truth is that the answer is never. And until you can accept that, the burnout cycle will continue.
On a sort of quantitative level, what are the key instigators or key identifiers of burnout? Like what is the lived experience of these people that come to you and say, I'm experiencing burnout, I think I'm feeling burnout? If it's through work or parenting or other lively duties, is it sort of society tells me that I should be better or that I should have more or that I should, and is it the pursuit of achievement, or is it a lack of mental wellness literacy, or what is sort of, how are they getting to that point?
It's quite diverse. I find that expectations do drive a lot of burnout, and it could be expectations of being in a workplace where the expectation is up here. Often that's not sufficient. When there is that, you might get really stressed out people when it's just a really high performing place. Typically, what you'll find is that if burnout is the norm in a workplace, it'll be expectations are up here, but we're also doing other weird things like restructuring 3 or 4 times a year, and then we're telling you one thing and then we're changing another, because that sense of being stuck in the stress response is typically what's underlying burnout. And so that's one way in which it can occur. Another way that it can occur is if somebody is in those early stages of parenting where, like sleep is a myth. And the expectations might even be coming from themselves, where they've put so much pressure on themselves and they can't be forgiving of themselves when, lo and behold, they're a mammal who hasn't slept in 6 months and they snapped at their kid, which of course is not ideal and it's not favorable, but no one is ideal and favorable at all points in time. And they might do all of the that they're healthy things at that point to soothe the child and make it clear that they understand that they've done something wrong, but then they really are hard on themselves. The expectations don't have to come from somebody else. They can come from themselves, and they can be cultural, they can be intergenerational, they can be across friendship groups. They can be across partnerships. It can be within the one human, because a human adopts these learned patterns and expectations and the shoulds, as I like to call them. Humans go through life picking up shoulds throughout their life. And I find that a really big piece of the puzzle of recovering from burnout involves liberating yourself from the shoulds and identifying your wants.
If we say that there's endless triggers that can lead you to that point, and effectively you're looking for a way to break this cycle of discomfort or this place where you can't really see a way out of it necessarily, what are some ways to sort of shake off the shoulds or to sort of break out of that cycle?
Okay. Identifying what the shoulds are is a really important piece of the puzzle. And this is one of the main reasons why I structure the start of the coaching experience with somebody the way that I do. People come and work with me for very, very different reasons, but the very first session is always the same. It's unstructured, there's no prep work, the person just shows up kind of going, what up? And I call it the story time session. And sometimes it is just the one session. Sometimes if the person has an awful lot that they want to say, I'm just like, take your time. Take your time. We can go fast once we've set a solid foundation. On the face value, it's me getting to know the person really well, which can help. But there's also listening to words like just, listening, which is minimizing, listening to words like should, which is that forcing a triangle through a square. There are other ways in which people kind of, it's this search for the different programs that people have created for themselves where they shunt themselves away from what they really want and into what they believe they should be doing. When someone's been doing this for a really long time, the should has become so overpowering that if you point it out straight up, point blank, they might not even realize what the alternative is anymore. So the healing long term of burnout sometimes is a path of rediscovering yourself, because if you've been doing this for a long time, who knows what you may have started to lose touch with. But to bring it back to your question, what would step one look like? I would say to start identifying what your shoulds are. And that's sort of just a collection step. And so in terms of actioning first step, I'd say try to figure out amongst the shoulds that you can identify, which is the one that you feel would be most tolerable to start kind of just poking it a little bit and go, do I really want you in my life? Gentle, gentle. And the reason why I like to say that, I feel that if a human is operating off a lot of shoulds, adding more pressure on is probably not a good idea. I like to utilize a lot of gentle approaches, to the point, but gentle. You can do both. You can be kind, but have momentum at the same time. I like to utilize a lot of humor, because I mean, existence is kind of hilarious sometimes if you sit there and think about it. And creating that sense of lightness can start to help nurture this sense of hope, because these shoulds, they start to feel like these really calcified prisons, and they can be. But if you just start to gently pick away at one, they gradually can start to dismantle. If you try to rip it away in one hit, that can actually sometimes backfire, because the brain doesn't like aggressive change. Even when something makes us miserable, if we've been doing it for a long time, brain associates that with, this thing keeps me not dead. I like this thing, even though I don't like it as well. If you suddenly take it away, brain's like, cool, panic stations, let's do it. And the goal is to not do that.
Right.
It's to nurture change, not to make someone feel like they're being held underwater.
And just to go back to something else you were saying earlier about how a first session is structured and what sort of a client will come to you with and how you structure that first session to sort of frame what's going to happen in the future. I think what I hear all the time is that there's a lot of myths around what the role of a coach is. And there's, obviously a million different types of coaches, and every single coach has a
Mhm.
different approach to the practice that they do every day. But I guess what's something that you could, if someone was looking to try coaching for the first time and they wanted to engage with a coach, what would be the best mindset or the best sort of information to bring to a session to sort of kickstart it in the right way
That I bring or that they bring?
that they would bring?
I'm deliberately just really, session one is literally just show up.
Mm.
Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, if I give them too much prep for that very first session, whatever patterns have been holding them prisoner, they're going to bring them into the session by kind of doing too much to it. One of the things that I like to say when I sort of have my, well, I call them info calls, but when I just sort of chat to someone to see if we're going to be a good fit, is that I like to say that one of my roles is to assist someone to feel safe to go off the highways of the roads that they're accustomed to traveling on their mind, and helping them feel safe to kind of just be like, let's go over there. Let's go off road and let's see what's over there. And so I deliberately like to not create structure. Perhaps what might help to further answer your question is sort of step two, which is a model that I've brought together that is sort of then okay, here's the free-form story time. Now let's place this into a framework that we can utilize to then take the coaching experience forward. I've divided that mapping task into two areas. They kind of follow the two, I'm sure there are others, but they're the two big schools of thought that I see occurring in the coaching world. One is the more traditional achievement driven, go get the goal area of coaching. And the other is the more recovery, return to the self, nervous system regulation, etc. area of coaching. It really bothers me that they don't talk to each other more. And the human experience requires both in order to have a sustainable path forward. And that's what this model intends to do. It provides a framework for a person to then almost bring the story and dump it into the different buckets within these two areas. And by all means, like, I haven't gone and invented something incredibly wild. It's essentially a pulling together task. I just really brought together many existing theories to kind of create a landscape of a person's regular experience. I'm sure that it will probably change over time. It's definitely not a diagnostic tool, it's just a self reflection tool. The achievement side, I've named the external world. The mapping of that, in fact, takes quite a lot from the Wheel of Life, which is one of the most long-standing models in the coaching world. Most people who are a coach will have seen it and worked with it and had it taught to them. Added a few other sprinklings of stuff that I noticed were like, this isn't here and I think I like it. In particular, to give an example, boundaries and communication, because if we look at burnout as this idea of the attack of the shoulds and about sort of liberating yourself from expectations. Those two things are very important. And so everything in that external world is an aspect of the human experience where our attention needs to be turned outward in order to get stuff done. And then in the internal world map, it's the opposite of that. It's where your focus turns inward and when you give back to yourself. And so that's what the structure looks like. Anyone can have a look at it. It's completely free on my website. Like it's completely free and available. I didn't want to do anything weird with that. It's also, like I said, it's not diagnostic. It's just a self-reflection tool. But the idea that I had behind it is that if someone is just as enthusiastic about one as they are between the other, eventually over time, you should start to feel that you can balance progress with self-care, because burnout is very typically this.
Mm.
where, where we're trying to max out on achievement and we're forgetting to take care of ourselves. I'm yet to meet anyone who's doing this. And I think that, insert late stage capitalism here is probably why. And so, really, the intention of my coaching is to assist someone to learn how to do this. And the up and down is actually quite deliberate. It's not me just drawing attention to my hands, because the human experience is constantly in flux. And our tolerance for accepting that is part of the burnout healing process. Because again, computers and other devices can do this, we can't. And our ability to accept that as true is a piece to the puzzle too.
Mm. So having spent a lot of time developing this model with, all of your experience of your career, building that all into a model that you now practice, and then layered as well with all of the other proven models that have existed over the many years of coaching, would you say, or how would you explain quite simply to someone that isn't aware or familiar with coaching, what is the role of a coach in sort of delivering all of that information?
Okay. I like to say a coach has more than one role. So I have a few little catchphrases which I utilize to help someone get a bit of a feel for it. I already mentioned one of them before, which is a coach is like your guide to help you go off road in the ways that you like to think, because everyone finds thinking in particular ways quite comforting. And if the answers that you seek at any point in time were there, you wouldn't go looking for a coach in the first place. you know and so I like to say it's the idea of going off road. A coach is also somebody who can just hold space and listen. This is the one area that all of the different forms of, like, you know person to person support services can hold in common. This is more of a personal choice as well, because it's literally just how much do you want your nervous system to be available to others.
Mm.
It's just the act of listening. Some people do it more than others. It's not a requirement, but it is definitely a piece of the puzzle that is available. And so a coach can just hold space. The way that I like to say it is a coach creates a safe container where someone can just throw whatever they want in there and know that it's not going to leave there. Because it's a safe space. It's also a confidential space. It's also a space that has a little mirror in it to go, have you looked at this? Have you looked at this? Have you looked at this? What about over here? What if we look at it from over there? And so what's implied there is, I like to say that a coach has all the questions, not all the answers. Um, to drill more specifically into that, if someone goes, hey, I really want to learn about boundaries, it's not like the crux of what I do, but it is an area that comes up a lot, which is why I like to utilize it, because it's a very sexy topic in the last couple of years. For example, if someone was going, hey, I really want to learn about boundaries, it is my job to point someone in the direction of resources that can help them upskill around boundaries. Where has Dr. TikTok led us astray around boundaries? When does a boundary start to become a wall? What is sort of like the general accepted, this is okay, about how to try to create the conversation that's most likely to go well, how to understand that there's still no guarantee that it will go well. I might lead them towards a few established, books and YouTube videos and whatever to help them sort of understand the area more, but it's not my job to tell them whether they should set a boundary or not. That comes from them.
Okay.
So they might go, hey, I've got this person in my life. They really struggle to respect my boundaries. Can you help me? At that point is where it's my job to create questions and not to go, you should do this, because
Okay.
otherwise I'm just giving them another should. And that's really not great. At that point, it might look like specialized lines of inquiry to help get all the details out and be like, okay, so here's the lay of the land. Here's what's going on. What's working for you? What isn't? What's the outcome that you would like? Here are a few different ways that you could choose to go about them. What's feeling good and not so great about any of these? Okay, tell me what's working. Okay, here are a few other options that are available to you. Do you want to make a decision now? Do you want to go off and have a think about it? Here are some other resources to get you through.
Mm.
Um, you know, it's really important to respect the autonomy of a client. That's something that I'm really, really big on, because I know that one of the common myths is that coaches just give advice. And we can give advice in terms of, like, here is the framework of how that thing that you've asked about works, but we don't give advice in terms of going, I think you should do this. The only should that I have the right to tell someone is that they should listen to themselves.
Well, and it sounds like the process in general, from even before having the first session right through, it's especially the first session, and then every session after that is incredibly fluid, and it's sort of feeding off the last, and you're learning together, pivoting,
Mhm.
changing direction, asking questions, and sort of discovering where to go
Yeah,
next. Is that right?
absolutely. And again, to bring it back to what I said earlier, that idea that humans can't be separated from their context.
Mm.
So with that mapping task, what a person will then do is choose areas that they want to focus on. And what I usually like to say is, look, that sort of forms the golden thread that we'll pull out from session to session. But every now and then the plan needs to wait, because it's not that uncommon to show up to a session and I've done all my prep and I'm like, okay, they were going to go off and do this, this, and that. Um, and oh, I also thought of this other thing, and here's a cool resource that I want to tell them about, and because they're making such great headway in this area. And then I show up to the session and I've just got to face this along, and it's like, okay, what happened? Because life doesn't stop just because you start doing the coaching process, right? And so I like to create a dance between pulling at the golden thread and meeting a person where they are on a particular day. And that thing that may have happened might have nothing to do with any of the other stuff that we've been talking about, or it might be a step that they tried and it didn't actually go according to plan because, well, lo and behold, not everything works exactly the way we expect it to, right? For example, to bring it back to the boundaries conversation, they might have tried to set a boundary with someone and it created World War III for them. And it's like, okay, back to the drawing board, good on you for trying, etc., etc. There is an awful lot of need to adjust as we go along, because otherwise we're just starting to treat the human like the computer, where it's like, well, this is the next step in the plan. And it's like, no one wants to hear that when they're upset. They
Right.
want you to listen.
Yeah. And I think the other thing with the myths as well is that there's a huge amount of short form content now online that sort of perpetuates these ideas of you can do anything, you can be anyone, you can achieve anything, and sort of creating a lot of shoulds in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
What role do you see that playing on sort of the collective mindset of the social media user? Like, is it a net positive, a net negative? Is it helping people think about this, or is it making people feel worse that they're not a certain way?
Oh. This is going to ruffle some feathers. So, look, there are always exceptions to every norm. And I really like the way you framed it there, where it's like, is it a net positive or a net negative? Of course, there will be many, many, many instances where people can and do benefit from looking at certain short form media. But when we zoom all the way out, I would be inclined to say it's a net negative response. And it's not my opinion, the data's kind of out there. I mean,
Mm.
it is also my opinion, but the evidence is out there. I don't agree that the bans are the best way to go about anything, if any sort of making anything illegal over history is anything to go by. I mean, it doesn't really work. But where I'm going with this is like, well, the social media bans aren't happening for no reason, right? They are happening for a reason. Personally, I feel that education and more supportive methods so that someone can learn to coexist with something
Mm.
tends to have more success, but we don't have time for that. Don't have time for that one. But the bottom line there is that if this was all tickety boo and everything was amazing, well, why is that happening in the first place? That is largely data driven. I mean, personally, I deleted my TikTok, I bombed my Instagram, because I felt a lot of shoulds coming onto me as a coach.
Mm.
Because what's really interesting about this is that it's everywhere. It's
Mm.
everywhere. It's not just happening in certain pockets of society. I think that in the personal development space is possibly one of the worst places that it's happening, particularly through this evolution of these almost, you know, superhuman podcasters who have these almost religious like followings.
Right.
Anyone, and a lot of them are in the self-development space. Now, do I think that they're inherently bad people? No, of course not. They're probably largely captured by the shoulds as well, because once you're there, good luck trying to get out of that. You know? Good luck trying to get out of that mold. For example, I will put my hand up and say I haven't properly pursued it, but I think I saw something about like Brené Brown wanting to get out of that space because she never really wanted to be seen as a guru in the first place, just to
Mm,
sort of pluck an example of it. This is everywhere. And the tricky thing with short form media is that it fries your capacity to pay attention. It increases your opportunity to be captured by the algorithm because the algorithm catches you at the end of a piece of content, right?
mm,
And if you're watching something that's long form, there's simply less opportunities for it to capture you. Whereas if you're watching something, it's over within 30 seconds. It's just like, it just turns into this flywheel. And that already has so many demonstrated impacts on our capacity to focus, on our adaptation requiring highly dopaminergic stimuli, our becoming addicted to devices, fubbing our partners, our relationships drop down in quality. Therefore, we have less patience to sit there and have
mm.
conversations like this with somebody because this takes a lot of concentration in order to do. And they're really enjoyable. But if you're accustomed to getting a ping of dopamine every 30 seconds, you wouldn't actually be able to enjoy this.
Mm.
If that becomes something that you're super, super just inundated with. And so a lot of the issues with short form media is not about what's in the piece of content itself. It's about the structure around it. Insofar as the piece of content itself, I think that can be hit and miss just like anything else. Um, you know, the tricky thing about it is because there's only like 30 seconds to a minute and a half or whatever it is now. Like I literally, the only reel I want to do now is one that I just drop into my Instagram to be like, real person, this is why there's nothing here
Right.
because soz, I hate this. But I refuse to participate, which was one of the most liberating experiences for
Mm.
me. But things can be taken so out of context because, again, things can't be removed from their context. And one small piece of data can be really valuable, but it can also get really lost in translation, which then can also draw that tendency towards clickbait. Because if you know you've only got a few seconds to capture someone's attention, otherwise they swipe away, you're more likely to say something dramatic
Mm.
because the pressure exists on the content creators, not just on the consumers. I have a lot of opinions about this, but yes, the TLDR is everything has capacity for great and evil, but I feel like net negative is probably what's going on in short form.
Yeah, fair. I think that the other thing that I've noticed with short form content from a less from a content perspective, but more a platform perspective, is that it's one of the few content types that we engage with that completely removes the concept or the behavior of inquiry. There's no search, there's no sense of discovery. It's just scroll, scroll, scroll until something that, piques your attention comes along. It feels like that's a quite a strange way to consume content. It's random. It's completely random, and obviously the algorithm adapts over time, but it's still not a true reflection of the content that you'd want to see. So I think the reason I ask about this net positive versus net negative is I think there can be good short form content that
Mm,
encourages inquiry. If you see an amazing 1 minute clip about a concept that you hadn't heard of before, maybe it pushes you down a path that you wouldn't have gone otherwise. But yeah, I
yes.
agree with everything you've said that, generally speaking, I'd say it's probably a net negative.
Yeah, and I think the piece that's like, because I agree with what you just said there as well, and that's where it's a pity that in those instances, there is a limit to how much the creator of that piece of content has on what happens next.
Mm,
Because yes, they can go, okay, go over here and have a look at this. But if the algorithm shoves something else in the person's face, will they do it? Will they not? Hopefully, sometimes they do, sometimes they do. But I think also just that because it becomes such that flywheel effect, it's also about like how present is the person by the time they get to that piece of content. At what point are they just like they're not even really aware? And it's a shame, right? Because it actually does the actual piece of content a disservice. Because I agree that the actual piece of content itself can still be pretty good, like really good, but it's more about everything, the framework that's around it, that I think is becoming largely the issue. Um, because sure, someone can always do, I'm like, screw it, I don't care, I'm just going to make outrageous clickbait. But that's an individual's choice, right? Like, you're always going to get people who abuse the system. You're always going to get people who try to do the right thing. I think the concern is that for people who try to do the right thing and who might make a genuinely excellent piece of content, there is a lot that's outside of their control of whether or not, well, what state the consumer will be in when they arrive at that piece of content, and how much of a pull there might be to drag them off to something completely irrelevant within 2 seconds. Yeah, as well as that whole capacity for attention in general. But yeah.
So I'm gonna jump over to our Q&A now. We have a couple of questions
Please.
from the audience. The first one is highly relevant to what we're talking about right now, so it's probably a good segue into that. So this question is, how do you navigate all of the content and experts to find authentic purpose? And is authentic purpose possible?
Oof. Well, you don't navigate all the content for starters, because if you try to do all the content, then you'll never get around to doing anything else. Um, this is where we're going to lean into a bit of nihilism, because I'm a big believer of everything is connected. I'm a big believer of nothing matters. I think they're actually the same thing. I believe humans are making creatures. This idea that we have this purpose handed to us, well, I'm a coach. I can't believe in that, because what's the point in me? If the purpose is already there somewhere, it's like, well, what am I doing? What am I doing? And what if a human decides to change their mind? I've seen too much evidence that humans have the capacity and the permission to change their mind, so long as they give themselves that permission. I'm a really big advocate of this idea that you get to create your own purpose and your own meaning. I know a lot of people might not agree with that, and they definitely don't have to, but that would just mean that we might just not be a good fit. And it can be very terrifying, because it kind of feels like you're looking at the void, because you are. You're looking into the void, and the void smiles and waves back. But it's also very freeing, because it means that if the purpose that you feel that is driving you right now is not working for you, you actually have the permission to just let it go and grab something else. In terms of how to find that purpose, I would say realize that there is no one true correct purpose in the first place is probably a good step, because this idea that there is one true correct path and everything else is wrong is a lot of what paralyzes people and pushes them into burnout in the first place. And so, to sort of bring it back to a particular reflection point, I'd be like, well, what is pulling you in? What is drawing you in at the moment? What is making you feel curious? What do you feel yourself pull towards? And how can you create purpose around that?
And so in terms of trying to figure that out, I mean, there's so much stimuli that we get on a day-to-day basis. There's so many ideas that come from society, from our families, from our partner, about what success looks like or what our life could be.
Mm,
And as you say, we have permission to change that all the time. But how do we sort of measure whether we're on the right track?
mm. Well, first of all, if someone's really feeling like they're drowning in opinions, that's usually a good time to work with a coach. That's actually typically the state that a lot of my clients are in when I start working with them. And this is where I like to be contextual about it. And I like this idea of qualified opinions as well. And not mine, because everyone in your life is going to have opinions. But uh, this idea that, oh, you shouldn't care what anyone thinks, I actually don't agree with that, because a human who genuinely doesn't care what anybody else thinks is a sociopath, and that's not so great either. We are communal creatures where, we are supposed to live in communities. That's why mammals thrived in the first place, because we work together. So this idea of becoming overly boundaried, solitude seeking creatures who are all about themselves is actually not the goal here. But you might have 10 people in your life who all have a different opinion about this one aspect of your life. And what I usually recommend to a person at that point is be like, well, of those, you might hear a few that you're just like, no, that's ridiculous. So, okay, scrap those straight up. Then look at the remaining 5 that kind of seem like a good idea and they're really quite loud. And then it's like, okay, well, let's observe that particular aspect of your life. Of those 5 people, does the current set of circumstances for that person in that aspect of life, does their present look like the future that you want? Yes. Okay, well then maybe their opinion's not so bad. Because it's this idea of like, well, whose ideas are more qualified? And this is again contextual, right? Um, and this is actually the one place where sometimes people do come for something that's a little bit more like advice, because I work with a lot of small business owners. So if someone wants to create a virtual online business and they're a coach starting out, that's where it moves more into like that mentoring piece of going, oh, well, this is how I did it. Take it or leave it, do whatever you want. These are some things that work. These are some things that didn't. And there's always this idea of retaining the reminder that you are always the final judge. You're always the final person that gets to be the gatekeeper and go, okay, well, I'm collecting ideas and opinions and experiences and resources and all of these different things that make me go, that's interesting. But you then get the opportunity to collate these things and pull them away. And if an individual is struggling to do that, that's actually a lot of what the coaching experience can be good for. And that's why I said the piece before of like the container and the mirror, where it's just like, throw all the things in, and then you tell me why this is feeling like a good idea or a bad idea. I can utilize questions to assist them to filter through it. And eventually the clarity starts to come through. A really long time ago, a client actually set me the challenge of going, Susie, what is the answer to life? And I was like, oh, crap. And it took about 6 months to come up with an answer, but I got one.
Okay. Well, I can't
And
wait to hear it. Drum
the
roll.
answer to life is this, that at the end of the day, you have to make your own choice and live with the consequences. We do everything possible to try to hide from that, but it's the bottom line. It's the ultimate truth. You ultimately make your own decisions and you ultimately live with the consequences of those decisions. That's it. Everything else is arbitrary.
I love that. So that's just the approach we take to everything, isn't it? It's just a constant absorbing of information, of opinions, of rules and, perspectives and everything, absorbing all of that and outputting that into choices that you have to live with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
life.
Yeah, it is life. And it's why so many folks can get paralyzed at this idea of like the right choice. And it's just like, got news for you. Because it's why story time is so valuable because I'm also correct, right, only, always, never. I'm listening for those words as well because it's typically these really rigid ways of thinking that can get people stuck because the truth is a lot of it is arbitrary. A lot of my sessions become a little bit towing the line of existential philosophy because the bottom line is that it's never up to me to go, oh, well, you do this. It's like, no, 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 you choose. You choose and live with it. And you always retain the right to change your mind. And sometimes that can also come with creating like these little algorithms for an individual because they might be like, well, what if I choose wrong? It's like, well, then you reassess. Do I think about it all the time? No, that's how you create anxiety. And so it might be like every 3 to 6 months, you run inventory on everything that's going on and go, what do I like that's changed? What do I not like that's changed? And that's what my model is for, because it's designed to be a reassessment of the lay of the land every 6 or so months, because it allows you to go, okay, how have these different buckets changed? How has my relationship to these changed? What do I like? What do I not like? And what do I want to do with that information?
Yeah, that makes total sense. We might wrap up on this final question from the audience, which is how can I define enough for myself? We might need another
Yeah,
hour.
wow.
Yeah.
How do I define enough for myself?
What is enough and how do I measure it?
facetious response to that is the solution to life, which is that you make your own choice and you live with the consequences. A more helpful way to look at it is that you don't get to find the answer to that overnight. It is an exploration. The arrival is essentially acceptance. It's essentially acceptance. And the process is whatever you need to do in order to get there. Because sometimes people also need to toe the line of having a really rough time in order to reach that point where they finally go, enough. Because I think enough is a decision. There we go. I got there in the end. Enough is a decision. And sometimes it's a decision that we arrive at through different sets of circumstances. And it usually is a decision that we arrive at when our innermost self, aka your nervous system, starts to yell loudly enough of going, you will not ignore me any longer. You will not ignore me any longer. I'm going to keep yelling louder and louder until you listen. And at some point we go, that's it. This is where I draw the line. And that looks different for everybody. There's an element of acceptance to it. There's an element of authenticity to it. Again, it's that piece of surrendering. There's no simple, like I can't draw a diagram of what that's going to look like for each human, because the very thing that makes us so resourceful is the very thing that can make us so destructive, which is that tendency for more and more. And it's such a relevant question nowadays because you can always go looking for more. And there's so much noise out there telling us that there is more, and as a consequence that we don't have enough. So in a way to feel like enough is also to shut yourself off from stuff sometimes, which sounds really bad, but to bring it back to, one of the ways in which I've created enough for myself, it's like having a life where, like, I sometimes forget that everyone else sort of starts their day and flicks onto Instagram. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't remember the last time I did that. You feel like enough when you're not constantly being told that you could have more.
And if that's the case, how do we get to that point where if we can acknowledge that instinct that it's enough, I've reached that wall, what's sort of the process to surrender to that, I guess? What's a positive action that we can take to sort of wrap this up to surrender to enough?
Positive action. Well, it's probably not going to feel positive at the time because honestly, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be about 3 hours of ugly crying. I hate to, well, because what you've described there, it's when someone's inching and towing that line towards breaking point, right? I feel like it's that cut. It could be the closing of the laptop. It could be applying for leave. It could be walking away from something that's really very painful. It can be that messaging your friend to let them know that you're not okay. It looks really different in every human's experience. And sometimes it is when I get the ping, someone wants to work with you. It looks different to everybody, but it's where in that highway of your mind you turn a corner and you just go, I'm not continuing on this highway, is not it anymore. I have to change something. It's where that little voice just becomes like, no. It's when you listen. It's by listening.
Well, that seems like a great spot to leave it. Was there anything else you wanted to add just to sort of close out today?
Oh my goodness. I feel like I probably got it. Is there anything? No, I don't think so. I don't think so, because anything that I might add might be an extra 45 minutes. But I've had a really, really good time. It's like that was a really interesting conversation. It's always really enjoyable to have an opportunity to sort of have this space. As a coach, you give little pockets of thoughts to people so often, you don't really, because by and large, the goal is for the client to be able to have those expansive moments and to have someone listen. And so as a coach, you usually give little snippets and you present them in the way that is tailored specifically to the needs of that particular client, because throwing them the whole idea underlying it is usually not appropriate because it can be quite overwhelming. So it's really interesting to have that opportunity to sort of unpack the sort of like the theoretical framework behind what drives a lot of those little packets that I sort of offer forward to my clients. Because they're always developing, because a coach is just a person too.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's always interesting to dig into these bigger picture ideas because they're the ideas that affect everybody. We sort of all have that collective experience of these bigger meta concepts. But thank you so much for all of your insights and everything you've talked about today. It was super super interesting. Yeah, and thanks for being part of Coach Curious.
Thank you so much again for inviting me. I had a really, really good time, and I look forward to hearing all of the future episodes from many, many different coaches. It's always really interesting to hear the different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's a great point. Just to let all the listeners know, we will be doing an episode every fortnight with a new coach in a new field of coaching. So we'll be exploring lots of different ideas and, yeah, going down lots of different avenues that we don't even know about yet. So excited to sort of get into that. But thanks again, Susie, for being our first guest. It's been a great experience and a great conversation.
Really great time too. Thanks so much.